All of you. Before we start, I would like to request our ABA team to kindly show us a video for about a minute's time. Today, we have with us an academician with diverse talent. Glen Radojkovich has been an executive leader for 19 years, implementing a variety of curriculum across primary and secondary levels in New Zealand, Singapore, South Korea, and the UAE. In this workshop, Glen will be focusing on remote learning environments and how you can set up successful platforms for your schools and how to best support leaders, teachers, and learners. He will explore what systems work well and what must be focused on during these times to ensure success, irrespective of the dilemma one faces. Areas of school culture development alongside technology development are required to set up any learning organization or success. As the global situation continues to be perilous with the coronavirus, these tips will ensure you and your school find success in future lockdown situations and that you will be able to create online learning environments that enable you to stay connected and share learning well beyond the need for lockdowns. I would like to request Mr. Glen to kindly take it forward.
Thank you very much, Pradipta, for a lovely welcome. It's great to be here with you all and having an opportunity to talk about, I guess, what's become a focus for all of us in education. Now, I'm going to run through a series of slides, and I hope that at the end of this, there's something at least that you get to take away from it, something of use. One of the bonuses in a free workshop is that you're going to guarantee to get value for money, and that's something that hopefully we'll be able to provide. As has been said, I've been a school head for some time, been heavily focused on international education for quite some time, but I've also worked across both the British and IB curriculums extensively during that time, and so I guess I bring that to the table. As well as a fair amount of experience in working with different organizations that have developed curricula and also supported in leadership many top schools during the time that I've been ahead. My Twitter handle and LinkedIn contacts there. Love to connect with you and learn from you, because what I hope to get across today, if nothing else, is the reality is there is no master approach to remote learning, nor there is there to education in general. There's an ability for all of us to share our expertise, to share our knowledge and to learn from one another. And one of the great things about this particular crisis that we've all been working through is that it has taught us, if nothing else, how to connect globally with people and how to share experiences with people in a way that perhaps we were less willing to do. And there's a lot that we can take from that. So that's a little bit about me. I'm curious to learn a little bit more about each of you. So I'm just wondering if perhaps if we can use the chat function there, and if you can share where you're from, and we can have a look at which countries we cover currently today. I've noticed that we had Qatar, someone from Qatar, someone from Australia. Obviously India is covered. I'm here in Dubai. If you can just type in perhaps any other countries that we've missed as far as that's. We've got Mumbai, India. We've got Qatar, Melbourne. Great to have you with us, David. Hyderabad, lovely. Both Mumbai and Hyderabad I've had the pleasure of visiting and working in. So great to have a range of people from a range of different schools, and I guess all of you experiencing different constraints and restrictions with regards to your current scenario. If you're able to turn on your video without impacting on your quality, then do so, because it's always nice for me to see some smiling faces looking back at me rather than a name. So if you're able to do that, then great. If it's going to impact in any way the quality of the line that you have, don't worry about it. That's not an issue. But it's always nice, as I say, for me to see who's in the room and who we're connected with. What has become really apparent in this particular crisis that we're in globally is it's forced us to do some things that perhaps we needed to look at anyway. The last time we had a massive shift in education was probably the Industrial Revolution. And so this crisis, I think, has presented both a horror story in many instances, but also an outstanding opportunity for us as educators across the globe to think, what is it that we have been doing well? What is that we want to retain? How do we support our students in this current scenario? And then what is it that we should take forward from this particular crisis and way of learning, and look to infuse it when schools are able to open freely in time. Some of the things that I hope to cover in the time today is to set the scene for this new paradigm, to look at, I guess, my school story and what we experienced, to share that with you. Maybe there's something that you'll take from that, maybe not. There are a few takeaways that I want to share with regards to things that I think have been particularly useful for me and for our school in setting up. And there are some resources at the end that I want to share with you, and some connections that perhaps you can latch onto, who are very happy to share their expertise, to work with your schools and to help you further develop what it is we're doing in terms of online learning or remote learning. So in setting the scene with GIS, we're a 3-program IB school in Dubai. And we have the good fortune of having 1,500 students across those 3 programs. We're part of the GEMS network, so GEMS has 49 schools in Dubai and a much larger number globally. And like all of you, we were hit with lockdowns and restrictions from our government, and the government being the UAE. And very quickly they required us to make some significant shifts in what we were doing with regards to learning. Essentially, they closed the schools and said in 2 weeks' time, we will be heading to remote learning. And they closed them over a holiday period. So we had very little time together as a faculty to plan and prepare. But we've done a lot of work prior to this particular scenario starting. A lot of work around culture establishment and having our culture right. And one of the things that I think will become apparent as I talk is that culture of each individual school is the foundation for success that you have in whatever you map out. I mean, it's my fundamental belief as a leader, but I think it became really valid during this particular scenario, because we have to be able to latch on to that culture and use that as the fulcrum that drives us forward and ensures we're successful. So we've done a lot of work in culture establishment, and I'll talk more about what that looked like for our school. We had installed some software, and we were well set up using, at the time, Schoolbox, which is a great platform out of Australia, but supports schools essentially with a learning platform, communication platform and tool, which worked well for us. We had Manage Back for our diploma students, Seesaw for our early years students, but Schoolbox was the communication tool and assessment, teaching and learning tool that we used primarily prior to any of this commencing. We also used Google Docs and Google Meets, but hadn't really used Google Meets a lot because we were in a situation where we could meet face to face and there wasn't a great need for it. The fortunate thing is being a school where 100% or sorry, 97% of our students are expatriate and our parents travel a lot. We're already really well placed to be able to share things electronically. So we did a lot of digital meetings, we did a lot of chats, and all of our information was already up on our learning platform for parents to be able to access. And that meant when this kicked in, it was a matter of clarifying new ways of approaching learning. How do we shift our face-to-face interactions into online interactions, etc. But we already had the tools in place for the success, which was a plus. That redesign needed to happen, and it happened over the holiday period for us, where we pulled in certain people to work together. What we found is that we had a shift in champions, and I think this is a really key piece for leaders to understand in schools. Quite often, prior to a remote learning environment, you will have your teachers who are the go-to teachers with pedagogy every day, the ones that you go to for lesson observations, to share their learning, because they're well versed with how to teach and how to teach well in a classroom. What became very apparent early on was that a different skill set is required for remote learning. And you have to look out for those people who are the new champions, who have different sets of skills that they can share with faculty. And you can lift those people up and say, okay, we want you to be a tech coach. We want you to be making videos and content, because whilst you may not be historically what we would have seen as a lead educator in the school, your skill sets are now essential for us to be successful as a faculty. And so these new people start to percolate to the fore. And so it's revisiting some of those new champions, I guess, which are key. Communication channels I'll talk about, but obviously the requirement for everyone to be on the same page. We often refer to same page learning, both in schools that I've been in previously and here in GIS. And I think, you know, it is about ensuring that all three sides of the triangle essentially are on that same page, the parents, the teachers, and the faculty working together, and that you have open channels. And I'll talk about what they look like for GIS shortly and share some examples. Wellness is crucial. And I know you know this because you would have experienced this in your own school. And the reason we often have high sign-ups for online workshops and lesser attendees these days is because people are fatigued. They're fatigued by being online, for that being their interaction. And so ensuring that there was this sense of wellness, but also a sense of fun and a lot of flexibility, I think becomes really important. The biggest mistake I've seen schools make across our group, and we have the benefit of working with 50 odd schools, is that so many schools try to take what exists in the school day and replicate that online. And you just can't do that. You can't take a timetabled, synchronous learning approach and expect students to function effectively in that, or teachers to function effectively. So looking at ways of reframing that, but keeping the fun and flexibility, ensuring wellness for faculty as well as students becomes really, really important. I'll talk about some ways we did that. We surveyed and gathered information regularly, weekly, both from our parents, from our faculty, and from our students. I'll share some examples of that, but that was instrumental in us being able to pivot essentially and ensure that we were modifying our approaches to suit the needs of the learners, to suit the needs of parents and teachers, and that we didn't just stick with something, plug away with it if it wasn't working. In any new paradigm, in any new situation, it's essential that we're gathering information constantly, both from our own observations. And so we were doing a lot of teacher observations and lesson observations during that time. And so that we could give accurate feedback to the teachers on how they were performing. But in addition to that, from gathering that information from the stakeholders. And then obviously that whole reflect, recharge, and redesign, and then reconnect piece was really important to us, and so that we were continually looking at ways of doing that. And what we started with and where we ended in terms of the academic year, I would say were significantly different in terms of quality of the lessons that we had and the formula that we had. what we maintained because of our approach consistently was high levels of satisfaction from students and parents. And I'll share some of those with you. We celebrated a lot as we went along the way, and I think that's important to do. You know, we know this within our own schools regularly, is that it's important to celebrate, but when you've actually not got a physical community together, when you're not able to get people in a staff room and say, look, I just want to say fantastic work from the such and such department, or well done from these guys, and it's a wonderful event they hosted, we have to look for new ways to celebrate, because it's the celebration and reward that builds us up and keeps us motivated, and we need that motivation more than ever in a time of crisis. I'll talk about the wellness piece because to me it's massive and has far-reaching impacts, potentially in an international scenario, but equally in a local scenario. The final piece that we had was the government inspection. So we had a remote learning inspection for all the schools in Dubai, similar to our regular inspection. And it was involving 3 inspectors doing observations, looking at our documentation. There was a fair amount to prepare for it. I wouldn't say it was fun or well-timed, to be honest. We had other things to do. We were trying to concentrate on supporting a community. However, the school got the highest rating possible in that, and that was a credit to the teaching team and leadership team. They did a wonderful job, as did our students. And so, you know, that is, I guess, was something else to celebrate, but it would have been nice of them if they just let us off and didn't come in for inspections during the middle of a crisis. But, you know, these inspection agencies want to make sure they're doing their job properly, so can't blame them. Look, we'll head into a bit more of the story, the narrative of what happened, share some examples with you. In terms of the 5 steps that we had there, obviously we did our research, we gathered a lot of information. A lot wasn't from us. We were fortunate that China and colleagues in other parts of Asia had already been in lockdown significantly before us, and being a member of groups like ASHNet, they were able to share that documentation with us of the plans that they'd put in place. And so we were able to go through a lot of that information and make sure that we could pull from that what was effective, considering the IB curriculum, the things that we needed to do to ensure that well-being was being catered for. Obviously, we had to develop learning guides, and I'll share some sort of snapshots of those with you, but essentially we developed guides for teachers, guides for parents, guides for faculty. And these were relatively prescriptive because whilst we like to have elements of flexibility, what was apparent and perhaps different depending on the scenario that we went down is that when we're in a time of crisis, people need some direction, right? Generally speaking, would say, look, let's take the time to consolidate. Let's make sure we get all stakeholders' input as we're developing this. And to a degree, you can do that. But some people just want to say, hey, what is it we're doing here? We're in a crisis. Tell us what to do and we'll do it. So an element of prescription, but with the ability to reflect on that and make changes as we listen to our stakeholders, I think is key. We put those guides in place, and that gave, I guess, the anchors for each of those groups to look to. As I said before, we analysed and surveyed regularly. We adjusted the learning based on that and had a constant weekly review. So as a senior leadership team meeting is usually on a weekly basis, that changed to a daily basis for us, and each of those other meetings that were on a rotation of being fortnightly switched to weekly, and that enabled us to continue to tweak as need be. And then as we got to the end of the term, we were able to back off a little bit with regards to those. We had to reimagine the school day, and I think that's often a challenge for us as educators because we're comfortable with the familiar. We like the way things work, and if they're not broken, why fix them? In this situation, they were very broken, needed fixing. So it did involve an absolute rethink and how we can use our time more effectively. One of the reasons time becomes absolutely essential is, as you all know from the research that you've done, the students' ability to stay focused online is minimal. Adults' ability is similar. We can't expect them to be doing it the full day through and find success. So how do we utilize that time effectively? How do we get the balance of the activities that we're doing, both asynchronously and synchronously right? And that is a massive focus for us. And as I said, well-being as well being in the center of that, looking at some ways of flexibility. We're really key, and always has been as a school, but students having their voice is so essential in this environment, because probably more than anyone, the students were better prepared for online learning. They're pretty experienced with being online, particularly in the upper years. Early years were a challenge. That's a different story, and I know many of you will be familiar with that. The early years were a challenge for us, but the students in the upper years, I think many of them are already online and engaged in online communities well before we have been, whether they're gaming, whether they're in little groups, Facebook chats, WhatsApp chats, you name it. They're used to accessing communities online, and they have their own rules and parameters established for those, not for learning socially, admittedly, but we need to then say, okay, you guys that know how to do this successfully, tell us some of the things you know. Tell us what you would like to see happen in order to have some parameters in place for you for effective learning. And they were very good at sharing their knowledge with us there. Maximizing learning, cognitive load theories and different strategies to explore how we could do that effectively was something else that we did with our curriculum coordinators, running workshops for teachers on that to make sure that we were, again, utilizing that time effectively so we weren't wasting students' time, and also so that students had strategies where they could be more successful as learners. With regards to communication expectations, the books on the left-hand side, the guides that we produced in that 2 to 3 week period on the left-hand side, there were essentially our 3 different guides for students, parents, teachers. We had those translated as well into Arabic for, you know, about 30% of our parents are Arabic speaking, even if they're not from the UAE. So we wanted to make sure that in this situation, everyone was on the same page. We gathered regularly to share information via various different portals. Each of us, the divisional heads that you can see there, Kim and Lee, produced weekly videos. I produced a weekly video. We had a range of different news articles going up on the Hub every day, which is our learning platform. And on that same learning platform, we created, using those new champions, we created a massive range of tools for our teachers to be able to access and develop content. So as I said before, if you had people who are really experienced with Padlet, or they're really experienced in developing videos, whatever it was, we utilized the skill sets that they had, and each of those produced a different video that then went on our portal so that all the teachers could access that online PD essentially effectively from there. With regards to students, as I said, extensive surveys were done in that area, and we were working pretty hard to get a handle on what was working for them. Now you can't see all the questions down the bottom, but you can see the feedback that we were getting from them, both in the MYP and DP, trying to consider what learning experiences worked well for them, which approaches were most effective in the different phases, and which trends do we need to continue with. So that's going to be different for every school. All of you are in a different situation with regards to the different pieces that you utilize in the different ways, different stages that your students are at, different stages that your teachers are at. But I think that process of ensuring student voice and listening to it carefully is going to be really effective in you being successful, rather than pressing on with what it is we think we know about what is being successful for them. As I said before, community wellness was paramount for us. If we have time at the end, I'll show you some more examples of some things that we've done. But we were pretty heavily involved. We created a wellbeing page. I can't access it here for you, but essentially, if you clicked on that tab, that would take you to a page where there are a range of different activities, also counsellor links, support links for parents, support links for students, and opportunities for faculty to be supported through our My Health program. Now, what is perhaps different here, but I guess will be similar in different ways for you, is that we had families separated as a result of people that had returned home but then weren't able to get back in the country. So you had a father with a newborn who they couldn't see. He's now living alone while his wife and child are stuck in another country. We had someone else who was stuck in Morocco, someone else who was stuck in Sri Lanka. People sort of spread across the globe, highly stressed as a result of that, huge anxiety. There was upset because family members were coming sick, some who were passing away as a result of COVID itself. So teachers were bearing this burden of these personal circumstances, anxiety from not being able to connect with friends and being in lockdown. You had your family scenarios where in the UAE, children under the age of 12 were not able to go outside And that was for 3 months. They weren't able to go to a park, to a shop, for a walk, had to stay in their apartment. So if you can imagine having a family of 5 in the apartment, 4 of those kids being under 12, couldn't get outside the apartment. Everyone was pretty stressed. The kids were, and certainly the parents were. So all these different scenarios made well-being a massive, massive focus. What is it that we can do to make sure that we get it right? Because as you would be aware with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if we don't get those foundation stones sorted, there's no point trying to concentrate on teaching and learning. Because if you're not feeling well and happy, you can't think. You're blocked from it. You're unable to. Your body says, no, I can't do that right now. I'm too stressed, freaked out. I've got anxiety, whatever it is. So getting that piece, I think, in place and taking the responsibility for that as a school is a shift. We don't always see it as our responsibility to look after the physical health, the mental health of our teachers and students. We often do certain things and to a certain degree pay some lip service to it, but we were very active in ensuring. We put in place for teachers cooking classes, fitness classes, Zumba classes, there were art classes, all a range of things just to make sure that they had some balance in their lives, that they felt connected with their community, people they would normally see every day, but couldn't because they were stuck at home. So a range of different pieces like that. And then similarly, we had some fun. We laughed a lot. As you can see on the left-hand side, we had wacky hat days, dress-up days. We had in blue and white days to support different causes within the school. And we got involved with our students and made sure they saw us and they had some fun with us, and we laughed. We laughed every day. And any school that I've been in, that's essential. And look, I just put it to you, if you can't find ways of doing that with your community during a time of crisis, there's no time you need it more. Right? You need that positivity. You need people laughing along with you, laughing at you, laughing at successes, laughing at failures. And that way, that gives you the momentum to push forward, right? So those are some of the things we did, which I think made a massive difference. Our feedback from the community was particularly positive. We surveyed them, as I said, regularly. You can see the first 4 weeks there, we were starting to climb up. Sort of started with 91% satisfaction and then finished up with an average of 96%. So we got much higher results than that. But we were constantly looking at what works from students and parents in terms of engagement, success. We had some lovely feedback from some of our community members, as you can see on the top left there. And what was important for us was not just to get that feedback, but to share that feedback. You can imagine if you're a teacher, and our teachers, as I'm sure yours were, because they were in a totally new paradigm, we're having to basically become beginning teachers again. We're having to work until 11, 12 o'clock every night in order to give feedback every day on that work that had been marked, that presented that day digitally, and then develop new videos and intros, etc. for the next day. So they were basically working a full day from 7 in many instances to 11:30, 12 throughout the week each week. They needed that positive feedback more than ever to motivate them to continue the journey that they were on and to continue to feel positive about what it was that they were working through. So I think that celebration of success, both because it enabled us to review the approach to teaching and learning, but in addition to that, it was a celebration that we were able to share as a community, which made a massive difference. And as you can see, the feedback that we got went from grade 11 down to KG2. Here in the UAE, we had a bit of a drop off in some of our early years children attending, because you're in that scenario where they're not required to go to school by the government up until year 1. And so some of our pre-K families, we found it was really challenging for them to manage life, the online learning, and the fact that their children found it difficult to access curriculum because they didn't have the literacy levels. For some of them, we saw a drop away, but we still had high parent satisfaction from those who stayed on, as you can see there, from the KG2 parent who said, "You're doing an amazing job." That's just an example, but there's many others who said similar. For those who could manage it, they seemed to enjoy it all the same. Looking at the takeaways and the things that I think are important for us to focus on, and I'm happy to have in the chat here any questions about this one or feedback about this one. These are what I think are the foundation stones. They're the areas that we need to ensure are well covered for remote learning. Things that students need. If students are our center, and they should always be our center, if they are our center, what is it that we needed to make sure that we have in place boxes that we can tick in different ways according to our separate learning organizations? And these were the ones that we sort of had in place as our cornerstones. I'm curious if you feel there's anything missing, if there's anything you would add that it wouldn't be covered by one of these different areas. One that I think is key for us is obviously the ability to self-regulate and to reflect, or metacognition, becomes super, super important in a scenario where they're taking a lot more charge of their learning than they did perhaps historically, depending on the school. You know, teaching students how to do that, teaching students how to fluctuate and to be able to adjust as they work through different challenges becomes hugely important. So a focus on not only the learning opportunities and learning that they're doing in the classroom, the tasks that they have, but also giving them sets of skills to be more successful learners. Again, if we look back at what we talked about earlier, the importance of being efficient with time, right? My ability to understand what I'm doing effectively becomes really, really important in that scenario. And so therefore, the ability to adjust and for students to adjust needs to be addressed in giving them the skill sets to enable to do that. I think too, the physical health became really important for us in this scenario, because all of a sudden students were parked on chairs, teachers were parked on chairs. We did everything we could to try and support the faculty with that. So to try and make their lives a little bit more comfortable, because they were working from home remotely. We sent all their classroom chairs and bits and pieces to them so that they could set up a work environment where we could put them in touch with giving them access to the blue light lens glasses so that they weren't feeling fatigued. Little bits and pieces like that. In Dubai, we have a delivery kind of culture. Like, it's just ridiculous. You can deliver anything you like here. So, so in terms of you know, coffees and bits and pieces being sent home to perk people up and make sure that they are able to stay motivated became really important. Now, you'll find your own ways of doing that, now things that suit your culture and community. But I think those pieces to make sure that people are feeling mentally positive are important. Safety and security is key in an online environment, and this became apparent pretty early on globally. There's some pretty funny videos floating around. I thought about sharing them today, but we only have an hour, so I thought I wouldn't. But you know, there were some pretty funny videos floating around of people jumping into Zoom calls or chats and just frustrating the teacher. Now, I don't know if you experienced that in any of your schools, because students are probably perfect, but certainly we had a scenario where we had to work with Google to look for ways of locking down some of our passwords and access. I know Zoom had a major problem. I know Microsoft Teams had a bit of a problem at certain stages with unwanted guests visiting meetings because students had passed on that meeting ID to somebody else. And so working through the security piece became really important. Now, nothing drastic or majorly concerning happened in our school, fortunately, but we did have some annoying teenagers making some silly noises for a period of time before they disappeared. And then we were able to lock things down with the help of Google a little bit better, moving on from there. But I do think in an online environment, probably my bigger concern is giving students the skill sets to stay safe when they are independent and on their own. Because we shifted to a scenario there where perhaps parents were able to monitor screen activity a little bit more closely historically prior to COVID, but then the students could quite rightly say, I need to be online, not quite 24/7, but a lot of the time. And parents did not have the time to be able to monitor what they were doing. And the kids were getting better and better at doing it. So I think, you know, providing both families and students with ways to stay safe when they might encounter something inappropriate, what the best channels to work through for that. The pastoral care, if you like, of students becomes an online pastoral care. So what do I do if I come across something unpleasant in a school scenario? And what do I do if I come across something unpleasant in an online scenario? Is that little shift there? Who do you go to? What are the processes that we have in place? And those should be mapped out, I believe, in a student handbook that says, look, if you come across this or something happens, these are the processes and protocols that we want you to take for your safety, and that sort of piece. In terms of the second cultural piece, look, culture to me is key to everything. Organizational culture. If you get that right, there's not much you can't go through, you can't deal with. Two pieces, and I know David will be familiar with these because he's heard me yap on about them before, but two that are important to me and that help me frame where we're going is to make sure that we're intentional with culture, that we do work with faculty so that they understand culture in the same way a learner understands their learning metacognitively. And if you're equipped with an understanding of culture and how culture develops as a faculty, your teachers understand this, not just your leaders, that when they encounter a frustration at a different stage, they're then able to say, I get why I'm feeling this frustration. All right, to give you a couple of examples, I often refer to Tuckerman's model of change and team development, the forming, storming, norming, and performing. Now, if you haven't come across that, it's been around for a long time, but it stays true, essentially. And just to quickly go over it for you, essentially during those 4 stages, the forming stage is when we're all coming together. It's a new relationship stage. Everything is lovely and perfect and we're harmonious. You can't do much wrong. It's the honeymoon period that people talk about. The storming stage is when we start to find ways of working, and during those ways of working, there are frustrations that we have to iron out. We have to get right. It's the same as a relationship, right? When you first meet someone, everything is lovely, and then we start to iron out what works and what doesn't work. We start to talk about the things that are bothering us. Then they're normed. We get to a norm stage where we have a way of working and a way of doing things, which is really positive. And I understand now that I have to make sure that I keep the toilet seat down or whatever it is that the relationship has said that I need to do. And she understands this, and it's the same in a wider team. And then we get to a high performing stage where we can anticipate each other's needs and we can adjust those, right? And it's the same, and it doesn't matter what the team is, football team, sports team, organizational team, school. We have these different stages that you have to go through, and then you loop back and go through them again if you have a big change in your staff. So if we're working through these stages and we understand we're moving into remote learning, we know straight away we're going into a new storming. Even though we've already formed as a team, we're going into a new storming because we're going to have to develop a whole range of different activities. And then we're going to have to norm those activities so they work well. So when teachers come to you and say, last week you told us that we're supposed to do this, and now all of a sudden we have to do this, and now we're using this platform, even though last week we were using this platform, they get why. And they don't get frustrated because it's part of a process that has to happen for us to get to performing, to be successful. Additionally, I often talk about the beach ball approach, where essentially, if you imagine a giant beach ball and I'm on one side of the beach ball and HR's on another side and the parents are on another side and the students are on another side, we look through our lens and we only have the ability to see our color, the red strip. Someone else has to look through the blue strip or the yellow strip, and what they see will be different to us, even though we're looking at the same thing. It's a bit like the many hands on an elephant, right? We're all seeing different things. So that enables us to try and understand perspective, to be able to get that although we're looking at the same problem, I've got different issues that I have to face. Parents have different issues that they have to face. We're not necessarily wrong with our perspectives. They're just different perspectives. So understanding organizational theory enables us to better approach how we shape our culture as a learning organization and working with students. And every organization is different. That's the key piece. If I was to come in and say, this is what we did at GIS, this is how we established our culture at GIS, it wouldn't be the best thing for you to do, because in every school it's very different in the way that you approach things. But what is key is that you have to be clear of your organizational expectations, develop those collectively. For me, and for our school, amplifying student voice, as I said before, is really important as we shifted from face-to-face learning to online learning. From connecting to understanding became an evolution of sorts. So getting that piece right. I was reading actually recently this book. It's That Will Never Work, and half of it is turning into the sky of device, so that's really useful. But essentially, it's by Mark Randolph, who was the co-founder and the first founder of Netflix. He talks about culture, and there, similarly in the book, refers to the specific approaches to culture that they had as an organization. He also talks about dressing up funny and having a lot of laughs as a high-level corporate executive with his executive team. Different ways of lightening the load. Now, again, every organization is different. And Netflix, they dressed up as characters from different movies on a regular basis to try and lighten the load at meetings, you know, to lighten the mood at meetings. But additionally, when they had the right people in place, they focused on a culture that allowed creativity, self-discipline, freedom, and responsibility. And again, if you look at Google's culture or Microsoft's culture or a different high-level successful organization, they will have different ways of approaching what it is that enables people to be successful. In some organizations, high autonomy. In some organizations, it's the opposite. And that's up to you to determine. It's not for me to say. But whatever it is, actual intentional work on that area, I think, is the most useful focus for any school leadership team or for any organization to be successful. The yin and yang of remote learning is synchronous, asynchronous. And for those of you who haven't come across the terms, I assume most of you have, I'll put some definitions there, but essentially, as you know, synchronous learning is what happens when we're face-to-face, together, online and live. Asynchronous is when we're not, when there's work set and an opportunity for people to independently work at it. What became apparent to us is getting that balance right is probably one of the most important balancing acts we will do, and one of the most important pieces that we had to modify as we went. Initially, a lot of the early feedback from a few parents was, we're paying pretty expensive school fees and we expect all day synchronous teachers in front of our children. So the education piece to those parents that wasn't beneficial for their children, that they would get burnout, be physically drained, emotionally drained and unable to be successful, becomes really important. Them understanding that asynchronous learning can be really effective if we do it right becomes really important. And so having conversations about that, so we did a lot of parent education sessions where we were talking through different approaches to learning. And what is a huge flip for parents is that, and for teachers too, is if we're moving away from synchronous learning to asynchronous learning, why are we doing it? Because synchronous learning makes sense to people. It's what we do in the classroom environment, and therefore surely that's what we'll just do through videos. But the logic in that is like taking a textbook and turning it into a digital textbook when we have the ability to do other things. We've got this technology and enables us to approach learning in a different way, yet we're going to do the exact same thing in a digital environment? No. That's not sensible use of time, right? So finding that balance and working how we can make sure that students are successful but still held accountable is key. We don't want them to back off with their learning. And the only reason one wouldn't be supportive of asynchronous learning is if there was a distrust of students' ability to focus on their own, right? And to get on with their tasks, that they need to somehow be sitting in front of you in order to be successful. That shouldn't be the case. They should be able to work on tasks and submit them for us to check them. And that is something that I think studious students will do. And the other ones, we're going to have to work on ways that we put in different balances and checks to make sure that they are successful during that time. But I think that piece, again, it's one that you have to work on through the feedback with students. So we started off pretty heavy on the synchronous side because there was a big demand from parents. In the end, by the time we'd gotten through it, we realized that by reducing, and it was different at different year levels, but essentially by reducing the amount of synchronous time and working in asynchronous scenarios, it enabled us to differentiate far more effectively with classroom. Teacher could do 3 sessions with 3 differentiated groups, much more effective learning than sitting in front of the entire group trying to do a synchronous lesson for that same 3-hour period or 2-hour period, right? So looking at ways of breaking that up to ensure that students' needs are being more effectively met while others worked independently, ensure that we had better results and deeper understandings. So looking at that for your school, as I said, different age groups, it's going to vary. The key to getting the recipe right is the dialogue. What's happening between the kids and your faculty to ensure that you're all on the same page. Same page learning again. So one of the key pieces is the technology we use. Now I will, I've got a bunch of links there. So I think I might, I'm just trying to think about the best way to share them. I might, hang on, can I go back? Can I go back there? There we go. I'm going to try and post some of these in the chat as we go. Sorry, just going to the chat now. And I'll try and get to some of those questions at the end. I'm going to chuck some of these links in the chat. The first one that I'm putting in there is from Schoolbox, the group that we use as the learning platform. Now, if you go to that particular link on their website, they've got a bunch of different resources. You don't actually have to use them as a tool, but they've got a bunch of resources about remote learning and how you can best support your school, your learners, etc. through remote learning. Check it out. That's one that you might want to have a look at. Similarly, Seesaw, which is another useful online platform, particularly for the early years, has some great resources there. This one that I'm pasting now is from Harvard Ed. Harvard did a great job of putting together some amazing articles. It's well worth jumping onto, having a read through that. Gives you information on how you can set up a range of different things, but also talks about some of the theory about education and online learning. Worth digging into that site. It's regularly updated with articles, and as they in the States now are heading into remote learning again, and some of it is approaching school startup, because in different states within America they're starting to approach classes again, live classes again. There's different useful articles there. This one down here, I would recommend using Schoolbox if you can access it. To the question there, just about what platform would I recommend for online marking and annotating students' work. Google Docs is good, but I find Schoolbox a really useful platform if you can afford it. If you can't afford it, then potentially, that's another one that to access. I'm just popped in there another one for you to have a look at, which is the Padlet support link. And this one here that I'm posting, trying to copy. I'll go this way. This one here is a link to basically hundreds of universities and groups that are doing museum tours, that sort of piece. Really useful for you to be able to share distant learning experiences with your teachers. Now, for online meetings, obviously you've got the three key players there: Zoom, Google Meet, and Microsoft Teams. Use what works for you. Use what's most cost effective and what you're set up to do. They all do much of a muchness as far as it's concerned. There was some, as I said before, some security issues with Zoom initially, but each one has had something like that to have to deal with. We happen to use Google Meet. It was particularly useful for us, but it really depends on your school and the different situation that your school's working through. Hang on a second. Just wanted to make sure in these earlier questions that I missed, if there's anything that I have missed. You can most certainly use same page learning. I think that'd be key for you, David. Yeah, are there any questions? Feel free to throw some questions. I've got that open now, which I didn't have before. So feel free to pop the questions you may have there. One other final slide that I wanted to share with you. Again, some great content and people that you can reach out to. Craig Kemp is an educator, hails out of New Zealand, originally based in Hong Kong. But each week, Craig does a great podcast, primarily about technology and remote learning. So you can reach out to him. I'll just, again, paste his address in there. So it's another one that you can access. The Schoolbox one, if you're wanting to have a look at them as a platform and explore them as a school tool for you to use, then I'll pop that resource in there and you can reach out to them via their contacts page. Adriano De Prado and Phil Cummins both hail from Australia. They are very good educators, forward thinking. They look at the schools of tomorrow. So School of Tomorrow is their website. I'll definitely reach out to them and connect with them. Dave, as you're in Australia, they'd be ones that you'd possibly already be familiar with. If not, definitely connect with them. Tell them that I said to connect, because they're sound guys. They're very switched on. They've got a great forward-thinking approach to things, and I think that your views and leadership would resonate with them pretty well. And they've got some handy resources on their School for Tomorrow. They do a lot of consultancy, so they've got some useful tools that they would be happy to share. Now, I've left 10 minutes at the end here because I wanted to ensure that we had a bit of an opportunity for sharing stories or asking questions. So first of all, I'm going to throw the questions opportunity out there. Feel free to type in the chat if you've got any questions. I'll answer them directly now, and if not, then I'm happy to have to then move to people sharing some of what worked for you, because I'm keen to learn from some of you as well. So can we start with any questions that are there? We have a couple of minutes for those if anyone wants to type anything in.
So we have a question from the beginning of your presentation. Actually, I guess it's about slide 4 or 5. It says it was about the survey that you were talking about.
Yep.
Yeah. So the question is, I'm curious to know what was credited as being the best by the cohort.
Yeah, good question. I think it would vary depending on the grade levels that we were looking at. So we looked at it on grade by grade basis. So each of those surveys we could break down into various different grades. And the feedback that we received from students was primarily from grade 7 and above. One of the things that the students really valued, two things that they really valued that came out, I'd say probably more consistently, was in this scenario, they felt they had more say about how learning would be structured than at any time previously. Because we don't usually ask them, how would you like your learning structured? We just have always had it structured a certain way. So they really like that. They like the opportunity to give input to it. And we used our student leadership team in order to do that. And then the other piece that I would say was key was that they were really appreciative of the opportunity for us to bring in experts. What we found was happening there in the secondary in particular is all these particularly successful people weren't working. And so it was really easy to reach out to officials, people who are well known, and have them come in and speak to classes firsthand about subject matter that was really important to them. It supported with inquiry that we're doing, but it also supported with certain subject areas, and that was quite exciting and made each day relatively exciting for those groups that had experts coming in and sharing their time. And these people were happy to do it because they were stuck at home, most of them unable to go into their work. So for the first time, a lot of this, the situation freed up for them. I was just thinking here as well, there was a resource that I was hoping to share. Let's see if I can find it with you. Still got it open. All right. So just some other initiatives that we used, which, close the chat for a second. I'll just quickly scroll through them for you. We had a ELT support, or student leadership, executive leadership team support. They were working for the students and they were able to support them online. We continued things like the national anthem every day to make sure that students were able to have that connection with the community, the things that they're familiar with. Usually every day within the school, we all stand for the national anthem. And it's just one of the things that some of the kids were missing. So we played that live and online and had an ability for them in their own homes to stop and celebrate. As I said before, we continued with ECA activities, ranges of challenges, art challenges, all sorts of things going on for students and everyone else. Hat days and spirit weeks. During the spirit weeks, as I said before, so for example, on this particular spirit week, One day everyone was dressing certain colors, then it was Mental Health Day, so we were wearing blue and white to support that. Wacky Wednesday, Sports Wear Day, different things just to shift it up and to make sure that kids were having some fun and keeping things light. We ran a kindness campaign and looked at different ways that we can support people within our community who were in need at that time. And there were a range of different ideas that came forward for that. We had something that one of our student initiatives was actually Smiles for Zayed. So things that they could do in order to promote happiness during a time of crisis, which was a great initiative from our student leadership team. There was a socializing initiative, and it was obviously a bit of a change to what we'd normally have, but it was looking for ways for social interaction. This is nothing to do with learning. This is finding platforms and opportunities for kids to get together online and chat, supervised by somebody in some instances, and finding ways to do that appropriately. But the socializing piece was key for us. You know, one way that you can do that, if you're worried about having a bit of freedom, of like having an adult sitting there watching them having a conversation, you obviously can record some of those, or get your executive leadership team to record some of those socializing opportunities if they're going on, so that no one needs to really watch them, but they can go into them if they need to and check on them. We had a virtual iftar, which was an online meal celebration, and music that went with it. So I won't go through every single one, but as you can see, there was a massive range. We continued our professional development with a range of different activities there that people could access. Counselling sessions, peer tutoring. Peer tutoring was really successful, actually, utilising students to be able to book a tutor session with someone else and tapping into that. How they can become a tutor, what they had to do in terms of tutor training, and then supporting in a bookable slot. And then a lot of parent sessions where parents could connect and share their frustrations. Same way that we were learning ways of managing schoolwork, they needed to learn ways of managing home life. And so tips and tricks from each other, just for them to connect and say, look, what are you guys doing? I've got 5 here, I'm going nuts. I've only got 3 iPads, or whatever it is. So looking at those sort of sessions, as well as giving them information on assessment and reporting. We ran a lot of parent sessions. The highest ever meetings in terms of numbers of people attending our meetings that we've ever had, because of course no one was working. So we basically had all parents logging in, and you went from a scenario of maybe where you might have 50 parents coming in for some of the earlier sessions to all of a sudden you've got 250. They're all there logged in and engaged. So really useful time to be able to educate your families. We have 4 minutes left, and I'm just conscious of time, and I've dominated 99% of it. Any other questions that you have?
There is another question.
Yep.
What percentage synchronous learning did you settle on for the senior students?
With the seniors, essentially we ran a combination, I'm trying to do this quickly, combination of live lessons, right? And then drop-in sessions. So they had live lessons and synchronous lessons. And then on their timetable, there was only 2 of those of the 5. So if you had 5 periods a week for that subject, 2 of them would be live, 3 of them, the teacher would be available, but the students weren't required to attend. If they wanted to drop in for a session, they could. If the teacher wanted to pull together 5 students to differentiate the content, they could. It just made there was flexibility in terms of it, so they weren't required to be sitting there for all the sessions all day live. If they needed to, if they needed more time to work on it, because obviously even content-wise, it's harder for some students to churn through the amount of content that they had, as far as that's concerned. Just wondering if there are any other questions just before we...
One more question. What are the challenges that you faced in this new scenario? Maybe one big challenge that you could talk about.
Big challenge. Gosh, the whole thing was a big challenge, isn't it? I think probably the biggest one for me from a leadership perspective was getting parents to understand and teachers to understand the difference between quality of education and a remote learning environment. Parents who are struggling with fee payment or cutbacks because of their company and trying to leverage that frustration, demanding a fee discount. So, you know, we're not getting what we were used to have in terms of fees, so we should have some sort of fee discount. And the only way to put that argument forward is to talk about dissatisfaction. So then the teacher's upset because they're saying they're dissatisfied, but they're not actually dissatisfied. They just want a fee discount because they've lost their job. It's understandable. So yeah, those challenges of trying to get people to communicate what was really going on and why became paramount. And I guess sometimes you know, frustrations were there for everybody in the early stages, but we sort of got there in the end. Anything else we want to wrap with?
I think we can wrap up now.
Okay. Look, a huge thanks to everybody for taking the time to tune in. Look, as I said to you at the very beginning, free workshops are value for money. So, you know, you got to be happy with that. And if you've taken away one thing, just one thing, then that's a delight. I've taken away the pleasure of connecting with some new people. If you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter, if you've got other questions from there that I can support you with, I'm always happy to. You know, that's the beauty of being in education, is you meet other people that care about kids, that want to make a difference. That's why we're here. It's what we all do. So if I can help you in any way, I'm always happy to. Nice to meet many of you, and I do hope to stay connected in the years ahead. Best of luck with the next leg of remote learning. Let's hope we're all out of this crisis soon. And I guess that's all we have to say. Thank you and goodbye. Take good care.
Dr.
Yeah.
Sridhar
Yes.
would like to say something.
Thank you. Thank you from Aditya Birla Education Academy, Glenn. And I think it was so wonderful to hear, and also solacing to hear that somebody at the other side of the world is doing things which are similar to what we are doing here. And there are problems and there are good things either of the sides in terms of, you know, the things and what you spoke about, culture, the social emotional learning, and the well-being page that you spoke about for parents, students. I think that's something so wonderful. And that's a great takeaway for all of us here. And things like the iftar party, the red day, the blue day, I think these are the connecting paths, the socializing in the digital world, and we're trying to humanize the digital face. So thank you so much for sharing all your inputs, insights, and taking us through the remote learning. I think it was a great learning for all of us here. Thank you to all the participants who've joined in today and logged in to learn something from Glenn. And we have lovely takeaways from this session. Thank you for all the links and the people that you've connected through this session for the remote learning, which I'm sure all the participants will find it useful. So thank you, and stay safe, all of you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Take care.
Yeah.
Cheers all.